Welcome back to On Beat. I'm your host, Rob Rose, and we continue our quest to talk to beat writers from all 32 teams. This week we have Olivia Reiner from the Packers and Arif Hassan from the Vikings. Before we get into the interviews, I want to give a real quick plug to pristineauction.com. That's PRISTINE.com. Best auction site out there. All their merchandise is JSA certified. So jump on over. Use the promo code SLEEPERWIRE when you sign up, and you get $5 off your first winning bid. Be sure to check them out. And first up, we have Olivia Reiner, multimedia sports journalist and working with the Packers, the Brewers, and the Milwaukee Bucks. I think I got that correct. How are you doing today, Olivia?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me. Always happy to chat a little bit about the Packers. Lots going on this season.
Yeah, there is certainly a whole lot going on. How do you think Matt Fleur is holding down the fort so far after 3 weeks of an NFL season? Do you feel like he was the right person for the job?
Well, he's certainly pleased with the fact that the team is 3-0, and that's every week he says the team wants to go 1-0, and they've accomplished that by doing that 3 times. So team's 3-0, has to be happy about that. He extremely must be happy about where the defense is at this point. Second ranked defense in the league at the moment. I think they've only given up 35 points over the last 3 games, which is definitely impressive. But he came in, he was hired to lead this offense and to bring a new offense to Green Bay. And the offense, it's taking some time to develop and to click and to find an identity. I don't think the offense has found their identity through the first 3 games. They're 24th in the league right now in offense. They've scored 58 points over the last 3 games. So it's definitely not where they want to be at this point. Definitely not unexpected, though. I think, again, it's a new offense. LaFleur's bringing something different to Green Bay. And it just, it's going to take some time to pan out for all the guys to gel and figure out what exactly this offense's identity is. It definitely heavily emphasizes the run game, and the run game as of the last 3 games has sort of been lackluster. Nothing, it just doesn't seem like they've been able to get into a rhythm with the run game. So yeah, I think the offense has some work to do, and they've got a tough opponent coming up in the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're home, which is definitely working in their favor. It's Thursday night, which isn't necessarily working in their favor, but they still have yet to really, like I said, I keep using the word offensive identities, but I think that really is the big thing that the Packers are still looking for. And I think it's going to take some time to figure out whether or not Matt LaFleur is the right guy for Green Bay. So I don't think I can come to a definitive conclusion, but I will say that the players seem to really like him. The coordinators and the coaches seem to really like him, and the energy and the innovation and the ideas that he brings to that locker room. So just, based off of what the players are saying, what the coaches are saying, they like him. But of course, it really does need to reflect in the offense and their productivity on the field at the end of the day. And that has yet to happen. So I think once that starts to, if it starts to gel, I think people will be happy here in Green Bay. Fans will be happy. But right now, the defense has really been carrying the offense through these last 3 games. So it's time for the offense to give a little bit back and let the defense, take a breather for a little bit.
Well, and I know this is a short week and a quick turnaround to play the Eagles, but their secondary has been fairly generous against the opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers this year. Do you think this could be a bounce-back week, not only for Aaron Rodgers, but Davante Adams, who has not had the start? Neither of them have, but man, I really expected more out of Davante Adams after all the talk last year of Aaron Rodgers saying, I'm going to get him even more targets, which seemed absurd. He was the most consistent wide receiver last year, and so far he hasn't shown us a lick of it. So Are we ready for a bounce back? Unfortunately, when this episode airs, we will probably have seen this game, but doesn't really change the question.
Sure. No, I'm sure we know Devontae Adams is not pleased with the number of targets, especially last game against the Denver Broncos. He had 4 targets, I believe, caught all 4 passes for, I believe, about 56 yards, which, it's fine, but it's certainly not Devontae Adams numbers, and it wasn't something that he was satisfied with, and he made that very clear. Aaron Rodgers, after the game, was not happy about the number of times he was able to get the ball to Devontae. Matt LaFleur has not been happy. Nathaniel Hackett, offensive coordinator, has not been happy. Everyone has said that they're not happy with the way that Devontae Adams has been used in this offense leading up to this point. So they're going to have to figure out a way to get him open, because that's the issue. One of the biggest issues is the fact that a lot of these teams are smart and have figured it out and realized that sometimes they need to get double coverage on Adams, which, that makes a lot of sense. So if the Eagles are banged up in the secondary and that's what they have to exploit, then I think that it'll be good for Adams and getting him open and getting him the ball more often. He's definitely someone that I think we're all going to have an eye on tomorrow night. I think it'll be interesting to see. They talk about Jimmy Graham a lot. Aaron Rodgers talks about Jimmy Graham often. So does Matt LaFleur. They talk about him being sort of, I want to say, like the third guy when it comes to production behind Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. They talk about Jimmy Graham being a guy that can elevate this offense. And we have really yet to see it. We saw a little bit of it in the game against Chicago week 1. We saw he had the only touchdown. And that was his best game as a Green Bay Packer for sure. But besides that, we have not seen much from Jimmy Graham the last 2 games. He was healthy week 1. He has not necessarily, I think he was playing through some injury against the Broncos, I believe a groin injury last week. So he hasn't been entirely healthy, I don't think. And he was on the injury report yet again this week with not only just a groin injury, but also a quad injury. It's interesting how much they talk about wanting to get him more involved in the offense. And I wonder what his threshold is. And I wonder how effective he can be in the offense if he's not 100%. He's someone I'm going to have my eye on too, just because I am curious with all the talk about wanting to get him more involved in the offense. Are they going to be actually able to do that? So I kind of derailed that a little bit. I think Devontae Adams and Jimmy Graham, 2 offensive players that are due for a big night. I don't know if Jimmy Graham, though, has the capability of having that big night.
Well, he certainly had an amazing career with Drew Brees and was quiet until now. And I like his pairing with Aaron Rodgers because Aaron Rodgers is a smart quarterback and Jimmy Graham really thrives in the red zone. So maybe if this wouldn't be the week to pick him up on waivers, but if you are forced to start Jimmy Graham this week, it might be not so bad. He's definitely going to see that basketball type snag the ball off the top of the rim, red zone usage if he's healthy enough to play. Hopefully, do you think that's something they're going to use Jimmy Graham as if he's healthy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely in the red zone. My colleague Ryan Wood likes to say, with age, height doesn't go away in football. So he's always going to be a big target. And in the end zone, that's where he can be effective. And like we said, in week 1, that was where he was effective. And it just hasn't been there over the last couple of weeks. So I take them for what they say. They have said that they want to get Jimmy Graham more involved in the offense, which, again, I think is intriguing. And I don't necessarily know if I believe Jimmy Graham can be that guy that he once was. But, all the respect in the world to him, he certainly was once that guy. But he still needs to prove it here in Green Bay.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people have some recency bias going towards Jimmy Graham. I certainly do. He kind of burned me last year. I expected Aaron Rodgers and him to really pair up. So hopefully they catch a little more fire for round 2 or year 2, really. But so how long have you been covering the Packers and in turn the Bucks and the Brewers?
Yeah, so I moved out to Green Bay last October, so it's almost been a year now. I graduated from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, right outside of Chicago last year. I graduated with both my bachelor's and my master's, and I finished up the master's program in September of last year. And then, very quick turnaround, moved out here to Green Bay to work for the Green Bay Press Gazette as their Packers multimedia reporter. So I do mostly video. Occasionally I do some written stuff too, but most of what I do is video based. A lot of visual storytelling, but also just on camera reports and whatnot. So I've been doing that. And then in April of this year, I was moved to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, which is the sister paper of the Green Bay Press Gazette. We're both owned by Gannett, and they just moved me down there so I could have more opportunities to cover the Bucks and the Brewers. So I've gotten to do all three now, which has been a lot of fun. Yeah, that's essentially a very short rundown of how long I've been doing this. So I've been covering the Packers for about a year now, and the Packers are the teams that I cover most regularly. I do Brewers and Bucks here and there, but Packers, I am there every single day. So I feel like I have a good sense of what's going on there.
That has to be kind of one of those dream jobs, and to be able to turn around that quickly out of school and get a job with a major sports team is quite impressive. Speaking of impressive, who has impressed you the most, been the most exciting to cover in this past year?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Well, I think there's a few guys for sure. So I went to Northwestern, and something that's been really bizarre, in a good way, I guess, is that right now on the Packers roster there are 3 Northwestern alums, and there's a Northwestern alum on PUP as well. So there are technically 4 Northwestern alums on the Green Bay Packers, which there are only, I think last year there were 14 Northwestern alums in the NFL on active rosters, which is not a huge number, but it's significant, but definitely not a big number. So to be able to see 4 guys come from Northwestern, which is not, a school that necessarily feeds into the NFL a ton, has been very impressive and also kind of cool for me, because I didn't know many of these guys personally, or any of these guys, I should say, personally while I was in school, but I certainly knew who they were. And it's been kind of fun to see them have some success in Green Bay and to stick around for a second year. Like I said, all 4 of the guys that were on the team last year. So Tyler Lancaster, who's a defensive lineman, Dean Lowry, another defensive lineman who just signed a contract extension in the offseason, which is a big deal for him. Danny Vitale, who's a fullback who made a great catch in the game against the Broncos, a 27-yarder, almost had a touchdown. And then also Ibrahim Campbell, who's a safety, who's been on PUP, tore his ACL in December of last year with the Packers, and they kept him around. So he has the potential to come back, I believe, in week 6 if he's healthy and ready. So those 4 guys have been the most fun for me to cover, just because, like Tyler, for example, he's a year older than me, but we graduated in the same year. So it's just been kind of weird. We've sort of taken a similar journey. He was on the practice squad right before I moved out to Green Bay, and then he was called up to the active roster around the same time I started working. So there was Justine and Tyler when I got to Green Bay, and then over the course of the season they acquired Danny and Ibrahim. So there were only 2 Northwestern alums when I got to Green Bay, and then that eventually turned into 4 as the course of the season went on. So not one guy that has been the most exciting for me to cover, but 4 guys. I think it's just kind of a fun coincidence, but they're all 4 very nice guys in the locker room, very easy to talk to, always available and willing to talk, which has been great. And I've enjoyed covering them over the last year.
That's really cool. And I served in the Navy. I didn't go to college, but I ran into a lot of people that I didn't expect to see couple of years later, like that I was in boot camp with. You just kind of bump into these people. It's like, oh my God, I never expected
awesome.
to see you again. How about that? So I have to ask you about somebody who's kind of local to me. He went to the University of Maryland. That's Darnell Savage. How do you think he's integrating into the defense in Green Bay?
He's clearly, just from a production standpoint, I think he's doing very well. Last game against the Broncos, he had his first interception, which is a big deal on this Packers defense, because last season, I think creating turnovers and having those opportunities in the defense, that was something they really wanted to shake up in the offseason, just because there weren't a lot of those big plays last year on the defense. So for him to be a part of it this early as a rookie, and to he's the first rookie starter on this offense and defense. Now Elton Jenkins is starting at left guard, so he's not the only rookie starter on the team, but Darnell Savage was the first. And he has made a big impact right away with his speed. A lot of the players and the coaches have spoken very highly of him. Mike Pettin, defensive coordinator, has spoken very highly of him as someone who is mature and able to prepare well beyond his years, which I think, coming from him, says a lot about who Savage is and the type of guy who he is on this team. So he's certainly been impressive this far, and he seems to be gelling really well. I think one of the reasons that he's had the success that he's had is because he's confident. And I think to be a good defensive back in this league, you need to have that confidence. And he talks about it, and he knows, and he's got good examples in the locker room. Jair Alexander, Kevin King, tight DB group, and those two guys are two of the most confident guys that in the Packers locker room, in my opinion. So I think he's got a good group to learn from, and he's found a lot of success early on. So I'm very impressed with him so far, and I believe that he's probably one of the Packers' most valuable rookies at this moment.
I was really surprised to see him go as early as he did, but I was really excited to see a Maryland boy make his way into the NFL, and that interception last week was awesome. I got to say, if you're going to make your first career interception as a rookie, that's a hell of a way to do it. And kind of up the same vein as the previous question, is there anybody that's surprised you so far? Not just this year, but in your tenure, but it can pertain to just this year.
Oh, surprise. Good question. A name I already brought up, Danny Vitale. So he's someone that has surprised me so far, especially coming out of training camp. So when Matt LaFleur came in, he was kind of adamant about the fact that he wanted to utilize the fullback position more. And I think that's becoming more of a trend, I think, in the offense, or in offenses in the NFL this season. But LaFleur was very adamant about the fullback being a potential weapon in this offense. And Mike McCarthy's offense, the fullback was more or less extinct and didn't really have much of a purpose in that offense. But I think Danny Vitale really got a lot of good experience in training camp this year, and he put in a lot of reps with the ones, with Aaron Rodgers, with that sort of top group, and he seemed to do really well. And he has definitely been utilized more in the run game, but I think he has the potential to be used more in the pass game too. And we saw that last week against the Broncos. Like I said, that 27-yard catch that he had, almost right down at the 1-yard line, was so close to the touchdown. He didn't get it, but Aaron Jones ran it in right after on the next play. And I believe Aaron Jones said that in essence, the touchdown, the Danny Vitale deserved the ball afterwards because he was the one that set it up. So I think Vitale has been a surprise, and not just him and his talent, because he is very talented. And like I said, he can be used as a receiver as well. But I also think just the notion of the Packers bringing the fullback back and making that a part of the offense And I've been impressed and surprised by that. And I think Vitali is impressive. So that's probably my biggest surprise.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect to hear that. That was quite surprising to both of us, apparently. One of the things that I've noticed this year about the Green Bay Packers is that, like you have mentioned earlier, that defense is absolutely a daunting task to try and stop. I haven't seen anybody really be able to reconcile. And another guy that you stole from my local area, well, he didn't need to steal him, but he signed with you in free agency, and that's Za'Darius Smith. Do you see him continuing these numbers? And more fantasy relevant, do you think this Packers defense is for real, or is this a small sample size that they've done well in, but we'll see them go up and down throughout the year?
I think they're definitely going to have one of their biggest tests so far this season against the Eagles, against Carson Wentz. But that's all being said, I do think they are for real. They've got an incredible pass rush, obviously, in Za'Darius Smith and Preston Smith. Even Rashawn Gary has the potential. It's going to take some time. But we did see flashes of what Rashawn Gary can be. This past game against the Broncos, had his first career sack, had a fumble recovery. So Rashawn Gary, I think people have been a little bit concerned with the number of snaps he's been getting. I've already had people ask me if Rashawn Gary is a bust, and he's played, that was when he had played 2 NFL games. So I would have some patience with Rashawn Gary, but I do think that the Packers defense, the secondary, the pass rush has made a huge jump from last year. The biggest question I still have is in their run defense and how effective that can be, because it's been struggling the last couple of games in Dalvin Cook with the Vikings, and Philip Lindsay last week had a lot of success against the run defense. So that is where the Packers are really going to want to shape up. Defense isn't perfect. They've still got some things to work out, and if you ask them, they'll tell you the same thing. It's not perfect, but they have got room to grow. Za'Darius Smith is a huge part of that defense, though. He's listed on the injury report as being questionable heading into Thursday night's game. The people of the future will already know whether or not he played, but he is questionable for the game on Thursday night, which the Packers should. We'll see. Honestly, it sounds like it's an injury that popped up recently. I wonder if this is something lingering. He left the game early. It was against the Vikings, I believe. All the weeks are already starting to blur together, but and I forget what exactly that injury was, but it was against the Vikings. So we'll see if he plays on Thursday night. My guess is that if he was technically listed as limited in practice today, that I would be surprised if he doesn't end up playing. He's, like I said, a huge part of that defense. Him and Preston Smith have combined for 7.5 sacks this season through 3 games, which is a mind-blowing number. But yeah, you do wonder, are those numbers sustainable? These guys are playing, I think Za'Darius Smith is averaging like 90% of the snaps. Preston Smith is just a little bit less. So that's a lot. And it's a long season, and those guys are going to need to have their bodies. So it's definitely, they have to take care of their bodies and be careful. And I think you'd imagine that the Packers would like to increase Rashawn Gary's reps and increase Kyler Fackrell's reps as well, so they can give Za'Darius Smith, they can give Preston Smith a little bit of a break out there. So we'll see. But yeah, no, they are the real deal. And Za'Darius and Preston Smith so far have been worth the money for GM Brian Gutekunst.
Yeah, good Lord. I didn't realize the 2 combined for 7 sacks. That is a massive number. And if we extrapolate that out to 16 games, that makes, a
lot. Math is hard, but yeah, it's impressive.
That's 35 sacks between the 2 of them, like 35 and probably 36, something like that. But jumping from defense to offense, do you see any pressing needs on the offensive side of the ball right now for the Packers?
They just need to get the run game going. It's like that seems to be a big part of their offense, and they've been adamant that the run game will help set up the pass game, and it all sort of works with each other. So I think they need to figure that out. They did a pretty decent job last week, I'd say, of using Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams in tandem together. I guess this is a good fantasy thing for people to know, but Matt LaFleur has been quoted saying that he'd like to try to balance out the reps between Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams a little bit more. And they kind of did. I think I have to go back and look, but I think it was a little imbalanced between the two, but it was close to being split. I think Jamal Williams ended up having more yards last week, but Aaron Jones had those 2 touchdowns. So, but I do see them going and trying to balance out those reps a little bit more, keep them fresh. Aaron Jones had a career high 23 carries, I think, last week, which was, for him is or maybe it was against the Vikings. So it was 2 weeks ago. So it was a big deal for him to be at the point where he's healthy enough to sustain 23 carries. So I think keeping an eye on the Packers run game is an important part of their offense that will help build opportunities to the pass game as well. But I think the biggest concern of the Packers right now is their third down conversion percentage is bad. I think they're 30th in the league right now on third down conversions. They're converting 25% of their third downs. And I think they're only leading the Jets and the Dolphins, which are 2 teams you should be leading at this point in the season, but that's where they are right now. It's not good. Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, spoke today, and he said that playoff teams are supposed to be at about 40% on third down conversions, and 25% is not 40%. So that number is going to have to go up. So they need to figure out a way to convert third downs. I think part of the issue is that they've been in third and unmanageable scenarios where Hackett defines third and manageable as anywhere underneath 6 yards. So they've been in scenarios where they're more than that, and it's hard to convert those, understandably. So they need to figure out a way to get closer to converting those first downs, and we'll see if they're able to do that. But that should be a really big part of them finding success going forward in the season.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to win football games converting only 25% of your third downs, whether they be manageable or not. And I've, in my lifetime, come to expect a hell of a lot more from Aaron Rodgers than 25% third down completions. Recently, the mustache and the Canadian tuxedo have made more news than any throw or play he's made so far this year, and that's rare. Usually by now we have some amazing Aaron Rodgers stories. But I got to say, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to hear more inside information about the Packers. For the final question, can you tell us where to find your work?
Sure. So all of my stuff lives on PackersNews.com, on JSOnline.com. Both the Packers News is our Packers vertical, and then JS Online. You can find all of our sports coverage there. I am on social media as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Reiner Olivia. I'm on Instagram barely, not very often. I'm trying to build my Instagram presence back up, and that's at Olivia Reiner. I'm also on Facebook. My professional page is Olivia Reiner, Packers News, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. So I try to be everywhere. So you can contact me, interact with me, follow what we're doing. We do a lot of great video stuff, a lot of good written content as well over on Packers News. So yeah, it's a good time.
Well, and like I said earlier, that's definitely got to be amazing to come straight out of college and be able to get into a major sports organization and do well. You certainly would not be back for a second year with more responsibility had they not been happy with your work. So I really got to thank you again for coming on. It's been great talking to you, and this has been action-packed. Hopefully our listeners will check you out each week to keep an eye on the newest Packers news.
Of course. I appreciate chatting with you.
And up next, we have Arif Hassan from The Athletic. Arif, how you doing tonight? And you are the Vikings beat reporter, is that correct?
That's right, and I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for taking a little time out of your night to talk to us. How do you feel like the Viking season is going so far?
I'd say about, on a broad sense, as expected, 2-1 heading into week 4. A lot of people expected them to be 2-2 coming out of this 4-game stretch. But at a more specific level, pretty surprised. The run-pass ratio is something everybody wants to talk about. And the fact that the Vikings have only been in games where the home team has come out to a 21-0 lead by the second quarter. That's pretty unexpected.
Yeah, that's a crazy stat. So that's happened in all 3 games?
Yep.
Wow. I love that kind of analytics, kind of stranger than fiction facts that pop up there. How long have you been covering the Vikings for?
I've been covering them in some form or another since 2011.
All right, so you've had quite a few teams to look over. Do you think Dalvin Cook is the best running back that's been there talent-wise?
I mean, it's difficult to look past Adrian Peterson. Obviously, the 2012 season is kind of historic and record-breaking. But if you compared, say, his 2015 season, he was the league leader in rushing for the Vikings, and I would say that year he was not as talented as I think the numbers would suggest. I would say you could put Dalvin Cook's kind of emerging 2019 season up there, which is a lot to say, right? Because Peterson is one of the best pure runners we've ever seen, obviously a Hall of Fame running back. But Dalvin right now is making a good case to be the best running back in the NFL, and some of the stuff that he's doing right now is really remarkable.
I am certainly happy. I've drafted him 3 years in a row, and it's finally starting to pay off. And it's kind of one of those like, I told you it was going to happen. Just, now I've got him. But it's nice to have somebody like that kind of slide into the second round the way Dalvin has. Is there anybody that, since you've been there for some of these big names, is there anybody that's been more exciting than anybody else to cover?
Well, I kind of called my shot on Adam Thielen way back in 2014. I didn't expect him to be a starter. I'm not going to say, I was clairvoyant enough to say that this not even an undrafted free agent, that this tryout was going to end up being one of the best receivers in the NFL. But, I was pretty confident, he'd make the team and be a solid contributor for like the next 5 or 6 years. And I think relative to kind of what his station was at the time, I think that's a pretty good shot. So he was pretty exciting to cover. He was obviously available for interviews and stuff like that. So he was pretty fun to cover. The Vikings have themselves been a remarkably turbulent team, pretty exciting to cover in a lot of ways. I started covering them from a more professional setting after all the Favre stuff, but they still found ways to create all kinds of drama. Obviously, they've had 5 or 6 quarterbacks in that time. They've had kind of a lot of off-field stuff happen, especially with like Adrian Peterson. And I would say my favorite player to cover has been Teddy Bridgewater. He's just been a remarkable character.
It's great to see him kind of get some starting reps down there, even though it's due to an injury. And I hate to see Drew Brees, one of the best of all time, go down while he's chasing down a record. But it's great to see Teddy on the field and looking. I don't know that he looks quite as sharp as he did when he was on the Vikings, but he certainly looks good. Do you feel like Kirk Cousins is going to be the answer to get them back to the playoffs this year?
I would say he is not going to be a problem. I wouldn't say he's kind of a guy that can push them over the edge or carry the team by themselves, but this is a team that for the most part doesn't need that just because they've got so much talent everywhere else. And I would say he's the kind of quarterback that doesn't hold you back from your potential, and he can play up to the talent level of the teammates around him. So I think this is a playoff caliber roster, which means that with Kirk Cousins on it, it's a playoff caliber team.
So if you were playing fantasy football right now and you had to choose between Kirk Cousins or Case Keenum with the Skins this year, who would you take?
I think as a fantasy player, it might actually be fairly tempting to pick Keenum just because of the run-pass splits with the Vikings. But I would still stick with Cousins, not just because I think he's a more talented quarterback and that eventually bears out, but I think the Vikings are going to pass the ball a lot more as the season continues.
So I know one of the big questions has got to be in a lot of people's minds is it time to drop or trade Diggs and Thielen for people who are consistently getting more targets? Do you think that, are you confident enough that the pass will increase that you would hold these guys if you had them on a roster?
Yeah, I would hold these guys. I would trade for them. I think they're both buy low candidates, especially Thielen, whose targets have been a little bit further downfield. But I think both are buy low candidates that I would trade for, just because the Vikings, the only time that they've run more than you'd expect given their situation was early in the second quarter against the Packers. They ran the ball more than you'd expect for somebody who was down 21-0. So the fact that they raced out to these early leads, I don't expect that to continue. I don't think they're the 2007 Patriots. Obviously they're not. They lost a game. But I just don't expect them to race out to these crazy leads early on in games where they then kind of decide that they're just going to sit on it and run the ball. If you take a look at what they've been doing when the win probability has been between 20 and 80%, they've passed the ball just a little bit less often than your typical team. And on average, a typical team passes much more than they run the ball. So I think by the end of the year, you're not going to get the volume that you got last year with the DeFilippo offense, where all they did was pass the ball. Only the Steelers, I think, passed the ball more than they did last year. But I think you're going to get a fairly healthy volume. It's going to be an average amount of pass attempts, which Cousins isn't used to. He tends to pass the ball a lot in the offenses he's in. That's why he's been a 4,000-yard quarterback for so long. But I would say that we're going to see a healthy amount of volume going forward, especially as we get these tough games like against Chicago and throughout the season. I mean, I think in the fantasy playoffs for some people that do 3 rounds, I think the Seattle game is going to be a tough game. They're going to end up throwing the ball. So, I think that there's going to be passing volume there. And I think, Thielen and Diggs are both tremendously talented players that they'll be able to take advantage of that passing volume, turn them into yards and touchdowns.
It's definitely been tough to kind of navigate negative game script for wide receivers, and it's fantastic for Dalvin Cook because, good Lord, he is the running back number 1, I believe, on the season. Maybe Austin Eckler still ahead of him, but I think it's all in Dalvin's court right now. And he's so exciting to watch. Man, he just looks like an absolute monster out there. Is there anybody that surprised you this year or during your career that really was a good story?
Yeah, well, I'll say, this year thus far, 2 players have surprised me. One is Alexander Mattison, who's not remarkably fantasy relevant because he's not a goal line back. He's not vulturing touchdowns away. He's, they're alternating him 1 every 3 series or so. So, and even in the goal line, they might even take him out and put Dalvin Cook in. But he's been playing with, I think, a lot more talent than I expected. Obviously, he was remarkably productive at Boise State. He took on a full workload there, had an above-average yards per carry, was pretty productive there. But I just didn't expect his skills to translate in the way that it has, so that's kind of nice to see. And then this year also, I'll say the Everson Griffin story has been pretty remarkable. In 2017, before his foot injury in the London game, actually, he was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He was getting at least 1 sack a game, and therefore averaging more than 1 sack a game. He was playing really well against the run. He was this really dominant player. And in 2018, he had to miss part of the season because of mental illness problems and issues that he had to take care of with his family and with a therapist. And when he came back, he didn't look as explosive. But this year, he looks. In the first game of the season, I said he looked like his 2017 self, but I don't want to say that because his 2017 self was so remarkable that it almost isn't fair to compare. But 3 games into the season, I think that we can say that he looks a lot like that. So he's a story that I think has been really kind of remarkable. And then throughout my career, obviously I mentioned the Adam Thielen story. That's just a classic story. I think people living in Minnesota maybe are sick of hearing it just because it's so compelling that people will tell it all the time. But I think it's a good one. And then E.J. Henderson, a linebacker for the Vikings way back when, not way back when, but a while ago, that broke his femur, was expected never to play football again. And the Vikings put him on this injury recovery protocol where they stuck a rod in place of his femur. It was supposed to swell up so much that he wouldn't be able to play, but they put him on this protocol that brought him back, and he played at kind of a Pro Bowl level. I don't think he ever ended up getting Pro Bowl votes, but he got near a comeback player of the year, and he played at a really high level for a couple more years. And now he's working with the Vikings as their community outreach guy. So that's one of my favorite stories too. Yeah,
that's really cool to see people who fell in love with a city and an organization get involved in the community. And I'm a Baltimore boy, and Torrey Smith seems to be doing kind of a similar thing. I wonder if he's going to end up having a role with that organization in the time coming. It would definitely be great. It's another great story to follow. Who is the handcuff to own right now to Dalvin Cook? with Mike Boone and Alexander Madison kind of both looking good in garbage time, who would you think is actually the backup running back to Dalvin Cook?
I think on paper, you'd really want to say, oh man, Mike Boone looks so exciting. You know, he's sparked up, right? He's this tremendous athlete that has, you know, all kinds of athletic capability. He committed to Cincinnati as a receiver, and so we already know that he's got receiving chops and PPR upside if he's a back. But I think that the Vikings, they themselves have also been kind of surprised by how well Alexander Madison has taken on this workload. He's not as good in pass protection from an assignment perspective, but he's better in pass protection in terms of like his pure ability there. And so they're probably just going to trust him more. So I would say Madison is the handcuff to own. And then even when he is in on particular series, you know, his production is up there. So I would say that he would be the handcuff to target or to own. Personally, you know, I'm not a huge handcuffs guy unless they're already getting touches. So I'd probably stay away from them until, you know, there's a sign that Dalvin Cook is going down. Because he's just consuming so much volume. But Madison would be the guy that I would target or keep.
He's definitely he's looked hot this year, and I really man, I love Mike Boone. He's a guy I've had stashed the last 2 years,
so fun.
And man, like you said, he's a super athlete, and he just looks like a man amongst boys on some of those runs, especially in like the preseason where they're playing second, third team guys, and he just demolishes people. It's fun to watch.
Oh,
Definitely
for sure.
Fun to watch. Do you think that there's anything pressing on the offense that could be done to make the Vikings a Super Bowl caliber team right now?
You know, I don't know that there's anything that they can do to resolve any of the concerns that they have on offense, but I would say the things that need to get better in order to make them a Super Bowl caliber team, aside from, say, Kirk Cousins, let's say he's a fixed quantity. Let's assume that. Then I would say it's the interior offensive line. Garrett Bradbury, as a rookie, is playing a lot like a rookie. He's got some really good flashes, but for the most part, you know, he's been struggling a lot, especially in pass protection. And that, I think, going forward is going to be more important as time goes on than his run blocking, which has had some pretty good highlight moments. So that's a concern. Pat Elflein at left guard, that's a concern. We've seen a little bit of the backup, Dakota Dozier. You know, he's not that great. I think he's playing a little bit better than Elflein, so maybe at some point in the season they could rotate the two. But, you know, for the most part, they just need those players to play better. Josh Klein is going to be out with a concussion, or is out with a concussion. I don't know if he will continue to be by the time Sunday rolls around. But, you know, he's been their best interior offensive lineman. They're going to want him healthy all year. Riley Reif is playing like an average left tackle. Brian O'Neill is playing like an above-average right tackle. So they're kind of set there. It's really those two interior offensive line spots, which sounds so trivial and small when you put it like that. Like, hey, what's going to take this team over the top? Oh, the left guard. Like, that sounds so ridiculous. But given how we know Kirk operates under pressure and how much pressure, I think Pat Elflein might be the lowest graded guard by Pro Football Focus, and Garrett Bradbury is the lowest graded center. So it is really substantial, the amount of pressure that they're allowing. If Kirk continues to struggle under pressure like he has for a lot of his career, you want to give him the best surrounding environment possible. That includes, you know, receivers, running backs, offensive coordinator and scheme, offensive line, and they've got all of those except a complete offensive line. So I think that's what takes them over the top. That defense is so remarkable. I think in a year where the Patriots aren't just crushing people on defense and the Bears aren't creating these magical amounts of turnovers, you know, we would consider the Vikings the top defense in the NFL right now. They're really remarkable. So I'd say offensively is where you'd want to improve, and then on the offense, it's that area of the offensive line.
Yeah, they've definitely been one of the top defense special teams to own, and if you drafted them, you're extremely happy right now.
Yeah, I think so. And what's really interesting about the Vikings special teams defensive units is that they tend to win by not allowing points, as opposed to kind of a turnover-dependent defense in fantasy, something like the Bears. They sometimes, like in 2016, for example, they generated a bunch of turnovers for scores, but they're not a turnover-heavy team. I think last year they ranked 22nd in turnovers per drive, but that's because they've been forcing punts, right? And which is obviously the same if you're a defense, but it's different if you're kind of a fantasy owner. But they have been able to generate a lot of sacks. So if your fantasy team kind of gives you points for sacks, that's going to be important, and that's going to help them out going forward. And I think with the emergence of players like Anthony Harris, with the way that Eric Kendricks has been playing this year, and the additional pressure that, you know, Hunter and Griffin can provide, I think they're going to provide more turnovers this year than they did last year. And that's just pure upside, I think, from a fantasy perspective. And then special teams, they've resolved a lot of the problems that they have. They're a really good special teams unit, so they don't allow points. And then they have an opportunity, especially with Marcus Sherrill's back, who has the ability to score touchdowns. They have the ability to get you some cheesy scores here and there.
Now, the one thing that I've noticed about the Vikings roster this year is that behind Adam Thielen and Steph Diggs, I believe Chad Beebe is hurt right now. So who is the wide receiver 3 and 4? Like, if one of Thielen or Diggs were to get hurt, who's going to step up into that position?
Well, you're right. It would normally be Chad Beebe, and he is hurt right now. I don't think the Vikings have given us much indication as to who that'll be. They did re-sign Laquan Treadwell, which is not exciting to anybody, right? But he knows the offense. He is a special teams maven. So they're comfortable re-signing him. They had 3 receivers on the practice squad, and they didn't choose to promote any of them, which I think is pretty telling. But the other guy is this rookie from Colorado State, which has become kind of this pseudo hotbed of receiving talent. We had Michael Gallup come from there, Rashard Higgins, Preston Williams in Miami right now. And he's another receiver to come from that group. And he's been pretty good. He started off the offseason pretty rough, but he's been gradually improving, and he's even seen snaps on the field even when Beebe was healthy. And then obviously after Beebe went down, he saw a lot more snaps. So he's probably the guy that will end up getting a bunch of snaps. But honestly, I don't think this is like if Cook goes down, I think Madison scores points for you. I think if Thielen or Diggs goes down, you're not going to see a ton of points from BC Johnson, who is the guy I would target in that scenario. I think that they're just going to kind of rotate their targets to players like Irv Smith, who just had a breakout game against Oakland, or Kyle Rudolph. I think that's where that passing volume is going to be made up in.
And who's the tight end to own there? Are they going to continue? I mean, I know they signed Rudolph to that extension, but that was kind of strenuous to get that done. That didn't seem like that went as smoothly as some of the other tight ends this year. Does it look like they're going to try and integrate Irv Smith in and phase out Kyle Rudolph, or are they going to go strong with 2 tight ends?
Well, I think once you get to the red zone, I think Kyle Rudolph is going to continue to be a target. We saw a little bit of that this year. Cousins did overthrow him a couple of times, so it hasn't shown up in the stat sheet. But, Rudolph continues to be kind of this red zone, in a touchdown heavy league, that might be a guy that you would go to, or maybe in kind of DFS lineups if you're in a GPP. But I think from a volume perspective, I think they want it to be Irv Smith. He's had some trouble kind of picking up some nuances of the offense. His breakout game against Oakland, where he officially got 60 yards, actually got 72, but penalty called it back. Those plays were plays that he ran at Alabama, which means 2 things. I think first, it means that the Vikings do know how to integrate players into the offense, and that's a good sign. But the second thing is that we don't know what it looks like when they ask him to expand his role yet, and he's not going to be able to do the same thing in every play for too much longer. So he might still be kind of a longer developing option, but in a situation where you do have one of those 2 receivers go down, I think they're just a lot more comfortable creating volume for a guy who can create in space like Irv Smith than someone like Kyle Rudolph, who, in the past, he's had a bunch of 500-yard seasons. 2 years ago, I think he had an 800-yard season. That's not to say he can't be a receiving option, but he's primarily kind of this red zone guy at this point in his career.
And being touchdown dependent can really hurt your fantasy week, both daily and DFS and in regular season long. And I guess the last question that I have for you is, where can we find your work?
Sure. Well, I post everything that I make onto my Twitter. So at Arif Hassan NFL. It's spelled kind of funny. So it's ARIF HASAN NFL. Or, everything I write is over at theathletic.com. You can head over to my author page, /author/Arif-Hassan. But yeah, that's primarily where my writing is. And then podcasts, I've got, Norse Code, a Vikings podcast, and The Football Machine, which is primarily a Vikings podcast. You can find both of those on iTunes.
And thank you so much for coming on and telling us a lot about the Vikings and a little bit about yourself as well. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully we talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun.
And that's going to do it for this episode of On Beat. Thanks for listening. Thanks again to Olivia Reiner and Arif Hassan. Be sure to check them out on Twitter and follow us at Sleeper Wire Show. Follow me at ESORBOR1. That's my name backwards, Esor Bor. And we hope to see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.